DND number 2, Suffer the Children, in Jesus' name. Chapter 6. I thought maybe you had forgotten to come and see me, Madame Pierre began. Caroline nodded at her friend and teacher. I'm sorry. I almost did. So much has happened this week. Yes, I heard. The mother of one of my students said your name was on the radio and some famous singer is in love with you. No? Caroline smiled warmly. Yes. The elder woman clapped her hands together. Oh, this is wonderful. Is he very handsome? Yes, he is. Good, because you are so beautiful. We cannot have you going around with a revolting-looking man. Caroline laughed. Well, then, let me tell you quickly what I want to discuss with you. You, my darling, are a teacher magnifique. The little ones respond so very well to you. To put it in a nutshell, you are a treasure, and I want you to stop dancing in all those little shows and come work for me exclusively. You could be the next madam of my school, and that is no little thing. We have quite a reputation here, as you well know. Every child who seriously considers dancing as a way of life wants into our school. And we have students here from all over the world, and I have no children, little Caroline. You are the closest to that kind of thing that I will ever have, and I could not be more proud of you if you were my own flesh and blood. And I wish you to begin working with the advanced students. But Maria has lost her spark and is becoming bitter, and though I give her credit for what she has accomplished, I cannot allow my students or my reputation to be harmed. Caroline, I will pay you well. Trust me, little one, you will not suffer financially. So, there. I have laid all my cards upon the table. No, you have but to think about it and bring me an answer. I'm honored and humbled by this, madam. I don't know what to say. Well, say nothing now, my darling. Go home. Think. Talk it over with your new man. Caroline nodded, then looked up, deciding to take advantage of the meeting. Speaking of my new man, he wants to take me on a trip, a little vacation back to Tennessee where we first met. Oh, then you must go, she encouraged. How very romantic. But go, darling. Just let me know when, and we'll cover your classes. Caroline impulsively kissed the woman on her cheek. I believe I love you, madam. You say I'm like your daughter? Well, you are the closest thing to a real mother I've ever had. Madam's eyes misted. Oh, pooh. Now go. You will be here to teach Saturday? Yes. Au revoir until then, little one. New scene. Hello there, little darlings, Toby crowed, greeting Caroline's trio of friends. Well, hello, handsome, Rosie purred back. Someone is in a happy mood today, Irene commented. Feeling de-stressed, are you? Rosie elbowed her. Shut up, Irene. I'm feeling like a cup of coffee from my girl here, he said as he sat at the counter. Caroline smiled. Hey. He smiled back. Hey. They gazed into each other's eyes. Irene broke the silence. Well, someone say something. Oh, Toby cleared his throat. So, you feeling any better? Caroline raised her eyebrows in question. About what? About that farce of an audition? Oh, that. Caroline shrugged. It's not the end of the world. Life goes on. Toby saw that as a great opening. That's right, it does. Even when certain people go off on a little vacation. Well, this person is finding it hard to let people down who've been so good to her. I've thought about it, Toby. I even spoke with Madame Pierre. And she said she would get someone to cover my classes, but I still can't see how I can just up and leave. There's Eugene to consider. It'll be a short trip, a week. 2 tops. Her eyebrows went up at the 2 he'd casually thrown in. When's the last time you took some time just for yourself? I bet never. Come home with me, please. Toby hadn't realized everyone else had been listening. Apparently they all felt like they had to put in their 2 cents worth. What in the world is holding you back, honey? Irene wanted to know. Caroline placed her hands on her hips. Well, I can't just up and leave my responsibilities and go running off at the drop of a hat. What responsibilities? Eugene asked, coming in on the tail end of the conversation. Well, working for you, for one, Carol suggested, eyebrows raised. Eugene shrugged. You need a vacation, little one. You just say the word. I'll find someone to fill in. Who? Just who are you going to get to take my place? I'll work for him if he needs someone that badly, Rosie said, surprising everyone. Eugene smiled. That would be great, Rosie. Rosie hardly knows how to run this place, Caroline countered. Well, then train me. I'll start training today. It won't be long before I'm as good as you. Caroline looked from face to face. Fine. I'll train you, but eat first. You'll need your energy. While Carol's friends joked and laughed about Rosie working at the diner, Toby quietly watched. Caroline didn't think she deserved to be loved, yet all these people loved her. They were the family she never had, and Toby was grateful to them. And after a few more minutes, he stood. I have to get going, darling. I'd like to come by and see you tonight, but we're trying to wrap today, and I have no idea what time we'll finish, so don't count on me. She nodded, and he pulled her around the counter and into his arms. Have I told you today how much I love you? She shook her head. More than words can say, Princess. He kissed her and turned to leave. Work hard, Rosie, so Carol can leave for our trip soon. The women sighed with pleasure as they watched him go. My, Carol. Your life has certainly become interesting, Rosie uttered. Caroline smiled. He's pretty nice, huh? You mean he's nice and pretty, Irene laughed. Pretty? That man is too hot for words, Alice said. That man is your knight in shining armor. Don't you let him slip away, Irene cautioned. New scene. An impromptu shopping trip to buy some essentials for her impending vacation put Caroline in a happy mood. As she made her way back to her apartment, she couldn't stop smiling. Everything was working out. Rosie had been a quick study, Madame wanted Carol as a protege, and she was about to spend a wonderful week with the man she loved. She decided to take a stroll through the park on her way home. Why is it, she wondered, when your heart feels light and happy, the sky seems bluer and the sun brighter, even the birds sound happier? She watched the children playing in the park and her heart swelled, and then the darkness came back. Always the darkness, always the shadow that fell across anything beautiful. She will never have her own children. She will never trust herself. She knew what happens to children who've been abused. They grow up to be abusers themselves. She herself started out doing just that at 12 years of age. Oh, no, she would never put herself or a child in that position again. Allowing herself to teach was a small consolation. At least in a classroom setting with parents watching, she would be able to remain in complete control. There was no fear there, yet the thought of being alone in a house with her own child brought her terror. What if the child did or said something to anger her? Would she haul off and slap him? Or something worse? Closing her eyes briefly, she breathed deep and wiped the dark thoughts from her mind. This was supposed to be a happy time. Evening neared as she strolled through the park, down the sidewalk, and finally reached her apartment building. Pulling on the heavy green door, she stepped inside and started up the stairs. It was the voices that caused her to glance downward. Her eyes rested on a display she had no wish to see. The door to the apartment just under hers was slightly ajar. Even though Caroline had never spoken more than a passing hello, she knew the apartment was occupied by a single mother and two kids, a young boy and a teenage girl. Her landlord, George Mancini, had his hands all over that teenage girl. The young girl was begging George not to go. Bile rose in Caroline's throat. The girl seemed willing enough. Still, she was young and certainly easily manipulated by a man like George. Caroline started to say something, but stopped herself. It was none of her business. She'd never even spoken to the girl, so more than likely the girl would not be willing to listen to anything Caroline has to say now. She could go to the police, but from the way the girl had been begging George to stay, she'd probably deny it in order to protect him. Possibly Caroline could find time to speak with the girl's mother and let her know what is going on right there in her own home. She started to move on, but her toe caught the edge of the stair, causing her to stumble. She held her breath as George came to the door and looked up at her. He glared at Caroline before he quietly closed the door, turning the lock with a distinct click. Caroline rushed up to her apartment, locked the door, and leaned against it, trying to push the ugly scene out of her mind. Taking a deep breath, Caroline told herself she was not going to let George or any other ugly thoughts ruin all the good things that were going on in her life today, though she would definitely have a little talk with the girl or with the girl's mother when the opportunity arose. It would help if she could remember the girl's name. Mary or Sherry? Yes, Sherry. That's it. She would definitely have a talk with them soon. Frozen dinner placed neatly in the oven, Caroline went into the bedroom to change, and she felt energized. Some worn jeans and a ragged t-shirt to go along with some good old-fashioned house cleaning would be just the thing to pass the time away tonight. However, when she emerged from her bedroom, George was standing in her apartment. Startled, Caroline drew in a sharp breath. "Get out," she demanded. "In time," he purred, moving slowly toward her. "It's not rent time." "No, maybe not. We're just going to have a little conversation, you and me. You see, I know you saw me and Sherry, and I just want to make sure you understand that our relationship is none of your business." "She's a child," Caroline spat. George smirked. "She's old enough, and she fancies herself in love with me." "And what about you? Do you love her?" "Of course I do. Would I be with her if I didn't? I worship the ground she walks on. I live and breathe for her. I love her more than life itself." He laughed, seeming quite amused with himself. "You are a horrible man." He shrugged. "You're entitled to your opinion. However, I came up here to let you know, if you ever tell anyone about us, you'll regret it." "Don't you come in here and threaten me," she said, attempting to sound brave. She tried to walk past him, but he grabbed her arm and held her tight. "Let me go," she hissed between clenched teeth. "I have nothing to say to you." "Well, I have plenty to say to you, the first being, why don't you mind your own business?" She jerked her arm away from him. "I don't know what you're talking about. It's not my fault the two of you were standing in an open doorway for anyone to see." He grabbed the front of her shirt and pushed her up against the wall. "Don't play me, baby. I know exactly what you're thinking. Who do you think you're going to go tell? Her mommy? All that would do is get Sherry thrown out of the house. Is that what you want?" Caroline swallowed hard, trying not to let her fear show. She shook her head. "No, of course not." Grabbing his fists where they balled in her shirt, she tried to pry him away, but he wouldn't budge. "Show no weakness," she reminded herself. Lifting her chin, she looked back up at him. "Let go of me. The scene with the little girl downstairs is your business." He jerked her up close to his face. "That's right, it is." He slammed her against the wall again. "And don't you forget that." Caroline grunted as the air whooshed out of her lungs. She pushed against his chest. "You've had your say, so get your slimy hands off me and get out." He leaned close. "How do you get off, acting so high and mighty?" She didn't answer. His face was so close to hers, her stomach pitched at the foul smell on his breath, and he leaned even closer and whispered softly in her ear, "You know, maybe someone needs to bring you down a peg or two, and maybe I'm just the man to do it." Reacting quickly, she shoved him and scrambled away. He turned and left over the sofa, cornering her again quickly. Caroline let out a partial scream before he slapped his hand over her mouth. "Shut up before you have the whole building coming in here," he growled. She sunk her teeth deep into the fleshy part of his palm. Cursing, he jerked his hand away. "You drew blood, you little witch." He roared back. He reared back and slapped her full force across the face. Caroline fell to the floor, stunned, and before she could move, he was on her, straddling her. "You're going to regret that," he swore as he raised his fist. He swung at her face but never made contact, because a large hand had him by the throat. George's face turned purple as he dangled in the air. Toby let him down just long enough to drive his fist into his face, and George screamed like a little girl as blood gushed from his nose. Another man helped Caroline to her feet. There now, you okay? I've got to stop them, she cried, and tried to jump in between the two men. Whoa, now, hold on there, the man said, grabbing Caroline around the waist as he calmly watched Toby work George over. Toby's going to kill him, Caroline screamed as she struggled to free herself. No, ma'am, it'll be all right. He's in complete control. If Toby wanted to kill him, the man would be dead by now. Nope, I don't think he'll go that far. You don't think? You don't think? She tried again to pull away from the man, but he had her held fast. Toby backhanded George, sending him flying out of the apartment door and sprawling across the landing. George tried to scramble away, crawling on his hands down the stairs that Toby followed. The man, holding Caroline rather than letting her go and possibly get hurt, helped her to move along to see what was happening. Besides, he didn't want to miss the action either. Toby picked George up at the bottom of the stairs and pounded his fist into the smaller man's ribs. He opened the heavy green door and literally tossed George out of his own building. Sherry came running from her apartment, screaming for Toby to stop, and Caroline was doing the same thing. The crowd that had gathered outside the building was a bit more encouraging toward the fighters. Caroline turned toward the man who'd been holding her. Please, please, she cried. You've got to stop him. The man nodded with a smile, and he stepped forward and placed a hand on Toby's shoulder. I think that's enough, man, don't you? Toby stopped and drew a breath. If I ever catch you near her again, I'll kill you. You got it? I will kill you. When George didn't answer, Toby started for him again. I got it, George blubbered. Immediately, Toby grabbed Caroline's hand and led her back up to the apartment, followed by Toby's friend. The moment they were inside, Toby pulled her to him, looking her over. Are you okay, honey? She nodded. He wasn't convinced. She had a red spot on her cheek, and he touched it. Here, sit down. Jeff, see if you can find some ice. Those words caused an old scene to flash back in Caroline's mind, and she giggled. Remember when I hit my head and you sent Ben for ice? He smiled at her. You mean when I hit your head? Let's see if Jeff does better than Ben. Jeff returned, the ice wrapped neatly in a towel. Toby smiled and winked at Caroline. Taking the towel from Jeff, he gently applied the ice to her cheek. Hello, Caroline spoke politely to Jeff. Oh, sorry. Jeff, this is Caroline. Caroline, Jeff, the world's best drummer. Hi, Jeff returned. So you are the famous Caroline. Are you sure you're okay? She smiled. Toby had rescued her. She'd dreamed about that. Now it was a reality. I'm wonderful, and you guys have great timing. Thanks for helping me out. Not so great, Toby growled as he touched her cheek again. And you don't have to thank me. It's not as though I see this guy forcing himself on you and had to make a decision whether I would step in or not. Tell me what happened. She shrugged. He wanted to make sure I knew he was in charge, and he didn't like it when I gave him attitude. Jeff interrupted. Is something burning? Caroline jumped up. Oh, my goodness. I left dinner in the oven. She ran into the kitchen and pulled her dinner out. It was indeed burnt. That was dinner? Toby asked as he came in behind her. She grinned. I'm a simple girl. Well, that reminded him why they'd come to Caroline's apartment in the first place. Jeff and I came by to get you to come to dinner with us. We finished up, and my band and Crazy 88 are going out to celebrate. Everyone's dying to meet you, but I'm sure you don't feel like coming now. Oh, of course I do. Just let me find something to change into. Caroline, we don't have to go. I'll go get something and bring it back. Some guy just beat the heck out of you. I'm sure you don't feel like going out. She laughed. I'm fine, Toby. I've taken much worse than that. Now you two just sit down and relax, and I'll be out in a jiffy. Man, Toby, she's a looker, Jeff said once they were alone. Yes, she is. He rubbed his hand over his eyes. I wanted to kill that guy. I know this is where I'm supposed to tell you that killing him wouldn't solve anything, but really, I wanted you to kill him. Toby grinned. That's why we're friends, Jeff. We understand each other. You better wash the blood off your hands, Jeff suggested. Nodding, Toby went into the kitchen to clean up. So what did she mean by she's taken worse than that? Jeff asked when Toby returned. She was referring to her childhood. I told you, her mother was abusive to her when she was a kid. She tends to make light of it, make little jokes about it. I think it's her way of dealing with it. She says she's just being realistic. Maybe so, I don't know, though I don't see anything funny about a mom slapping around her kid. It don't seem right, Toby, you know. Life's starting out so rough, and here she is having to deal with more abuse from this guy. Well, I've read that people who were abused as children tend to unwittingly place themselves in abusive situations again and again. Why do you think that is, Toby? I mean, it's not like she asked this guy to hurt her. I don't know. Maybe she's used to being treated in a certain way, and that's what she expects from everyone. Maybe it's the energy she gives off. Maybe the bad guys pick up on that. I don't know. I do know that she won't have to deal with this guy again if I get my way. They stood when Caroline re-entered the room. She wore a lime green knit dress that clung to every curve. It was gathered to one hip, exposing her left thigh through a split in the skirt. The rest of the hemline stopped an inch or two above the knees. Tiny little shoulder straps were all that held the dress up, and both men cleared their throats. "Well, you are absolutely beautiful," Toby said softly. Jeff only nodded his head. She patted her face. "You can't see the bruise too much, can you?" Toby forced himself to look up at her face. "Hmm? Oh, no. I can barely make it out." At the restaurant, Caroline was introduced to the rowdy group, who accepted her into the fold immediately. "Where you been, Toby? We almost came looking for you," Ace asked. Jeff laughed. "Toby here had to get himself into a brawl before we could get back here." "Man, I can't take you anywhere," Ace teased. The music was loud and people were dancing, and Caroline found herself smiling and happy and having a wonderful time. Billy Bob rose. "Will you dance with me, Miss Caroline?" Caroline was taken aback and didn't know what to say to them. They were speaking in unison, and everyone else at the table had quieted, hoping to see the brothers do something solo. Billy Bob turned to each other. "I asked her first. You did not." They argued in unison. "I believe it was a tie," Toby said dryly, "and you can't both dance with her at the same time, so I suggest we flip a coin." They did, and they both called heads, and everyone roared with laughter. Caroline finally agreed to dance with both of them, after all, which wasn't too difficult since the music was fast. She danced with Ace next, then Jeff, then a few members of Crazy 88, and finally Toby. She leaned her head against his chest. "Tired?" "I suppose I am. It's way past my bedtime." He lifted her face up to him. "I really want to spend some alone time with you. Will you come back to the hotel with me?" She sighed. "I don't know. I have to teach a class in the morning." "Well, I'll make sure you're there." He ran his hand down her back and pulled her in close. "I need to spend time with you," he whispered. She sighed. "I want that too. I'll get some dessert sent to the room." "You think you can entice me with sweets?" "I was hoping. Besides, I don't want you to be alone tonight in that apartment." That sealed the deal. She had no wish to go back there either. She smiled and nodded, and suddenly Toby was moving quickly, paying his tab, telling his band members goodbye, grabbing his jacket, which seemed funny to her because he usually moved with exaggerated slowness. They bid goodbye to everyone, all of them very intoxicated, so Caroline forgave them for the lewd comments they were throwing her way. At the hotel, Toby and Caroline sat across from each other at the table in Toby's room, dipping their spoons into a giant ice cream sundae. Toby was looking at her in wonder. "What did you do to me? It's incredible the way you make me feel." She smiled sweetly. "I was going to say the exact same thing." They talked into the night, and he filled her in on Molly, the old horse, and the new Molly, her foal. He told her about his sister Molly, who wanted to be a doctor, and about Ben just graduating from college with a degree in agriculture, thinking to step into his father's shoes. The only farm-like activity Toby was involved in was the animals. The house was inundated with them. He told her it was like a mix of a scene from Old Yeller and Bambi. She told him how she'd gone about getting money for dance lessons, about her dance scholarships, and about some of the shows she'd been in. She told him about a few of the foster families she'd lived with, and that her mother was very ill and in a nursing facility down in Atlanta. She spoke of the children she taught, and Toby could see she'd grown to love them. It made him wonder again about her statement that she didn't want any children of her own. He realized she avoided one subject, the Stillwaters. Every time he brought them up, she redirected the conversation to a different subject. He would eventually find out what the deal had been concerning them, even if he had to do some digging. May I come to watch your class tomorrow? Toby finally asked her. Sure, and I can introduce you to Madame Pierre. She is so wonderful. You'll like her. Well, I already do, since she said she'd cover your class. So tell me, Caroline began, when are we leaving on this little sentimental journey? I'm ready now. She laughed. Okay, well, let me at least teach my class tomorrow and speak to Eugene and Rosie and maybe pack some things. How did Rosie do at the diner? Caroline shrugged. She'll be okay. I still can't figure that one out. I can't believe how quickly she jumped in and offered to work my mundane little job. You can't figure it out? Are you blind? Caroline's brow furrowed. What are you talking about? Caroline, my love, Rosie and Eugene are sweet on each other. Caroline's eyes opened wide. They are? Toby laughed. Yes, they are. It's very obvious. I didn't know. That's because you're so innocent. Well, I don't feel as innocent now as I was a few weeks ago. Why not? Because now I know what it means to love someone and to be loved. New scene. Ah, you have brought your young man. Bonjour, bonjour, handsome man. Madame Pierre kissed each cheek. Toby smiled at her. It's very nice to meet you, ma'am. Oh, he's not only cute, but very polite, too, no? Oh, yes, he is very polite, Caroline laughed. Madame frowned. What is this? She moved her hand over the darkening bruise on Caroline's cheek. When Caroline hesitated, Madame turned to Toby for the answer. A man attacked Caroline last night. Oh, no, ma petite. What man? Where is he? I will tear him apart with my bare hands. Caroline smiled. You're too late. Toby beat you to it. Madame smiled broadly up at the large man. Did you hit him very hard? Toby grinned. Very. A knight. That's what you are, a knight. I knew I would like you. She took his arm. You will tell me the whole story, but class is about to start. You must come sit over here so you can watch what a wonderful teacher our Caro is. Toby was seated near the back of the class, and Madame stayed at his side, offering a play-by-play as class proceeded. Bonjour, children, Caroline called. Each child performed a perfect curtsy one at a time as Caroline approached them. Caroline returned their curtsy. She led them through warm-ups and stretches and strains of Tchaikovsky playing softly in the background. Toby was in heaven watching Caroline in her element. She was grace personified. It seemed each child was important to her. She helped them work on their technique and taught them a small choreographed dance and finally introduced them to chain turns. They laughed as the girls became dizzy, and Caroline showed them how to focus and snap their heads around. And when one girl fell, they moved around her and let her perform her own version of the Dying Swan. You see, Madame Pierre said proudly, each child feels as though she has accomplished something. Caroline makes them feel that way. Toby nodded as he watched them curtsy to each other after the final stretch. Bonjour, mes petites belles, Caroline called. Au revoir. Bonjour, mademoiselle, they sang back to her. So now you see, Mr. Toby, she is excellent, is she not? She is wonderful. I can also see that you love her very much. He turned toward the woman, eyebrows raised, surprised by her candor. I do, he admitted. Then go and enjoy yourselves at this farm Caroline speaks of. Take good care of her. I will, he promised. Hand in hand, Toby and Caroline walked back to her apartment, and the world seemed beautiful. Flower boxes were in bloom on windowsills and porches. The blue sky and warm sun made even the dirtiest of streets seem bright and clean. It seemed everyone they passed was smiling and happy. A child in a stroller waved. The mother smiled. A businessman on a cell phone nodded as he passed. A cab driver helped his fare out of the cab and turned to wish them a good afternoon. Magic was at hand. Back at Caroline's place, Toby helped her pack for the trip. They would stay the night in his room at the hotel and fly out first thing in the morning. He didn't help much. Instead, he wandered around her bedroom. It was small and functional. Her bed was made up, a tattered cream-colored spread pulled tight. Several rows of dance shoes lined the wall beneath the window. In the bathroom, an assortment of tights and leotards were hung to dry over the shower rack. Hairbrush and creams were lined up neatly on the counter in front of the mirror. He touched her personal possessions while she ran around gathering this and that. Back in the bedroom, he opened a drawer. It contained lacy underthings of various colors. What are you doing? She asked, hands on hips. Oops, busted, he said with a laugh and then shrugged. I'm just snooping. Caroline startled, turning quickly at the knock on the door. I'll get it, Toby offered, hating the fear he'd seen in her eyes. Jeff, hey man, come in, Toby said. What's up? I thought I'd find you here. You're not answering your cell phone. Toby pulled out his phone and turned it on. Sorry. I turned it off when I was in class with Caroline. What's up? I just found out we got to go back into the studio. Some tracks were lost. We've reached everyone else. You're the last. He sighed. When do they want us? Now. Right now. Toby turned apologetically to Caroline, and she smiled. Can I come? Are you sure you want to? It can be very boring. Well, it can't be any more boring than watching 15 little girls walk around on their tiptoes. He grinned. You have a point. They finished gathering her things and headed for the studio. Caroline was completely enthralled watching Toby at work. He was definitely a professional. They asked him to play a portion of a song. He did. They asked him to sing. He did. If he wasn't pleased with what he heard, he did it again. If they weren't pleased with what they heard, he did it again. Every time he opened his mouth to sing, Caroline melted. He was good. He discussed minor key changes, tones, and reverb, and helped pump up the other guys when they became tired. After all, most of them were extremely hungover and not pleased about having to come back in. When it was over, it was very late. Toby took Caroline back to his hotel room. They would get a good night's rest and fly out first thing in the morning. Toby's friends, however, had a different idea. They decided the couple was about to have plenty of time together and so could spare them one night. They arrived at the door with cards and beer. Toby tried to block them out. No. No way, guys. Out. Caroline stood behind him, smiling. Toby, don't be so mean. Yeah, Toby, don't be so mean, Jeff mocked. They piled into the room and set up. Toby sulked for a few minutes and finally caved. If you can't beat 'em, join 'em, he muttered as he pulled up a chair. Are you in? Jeff asked Caroline. I'm not very good at cards. What game are you playing? Poker, Ace answered. 5-card draw, deuces wild. She raised her eyebrows. I'll try a few hands. Great, Jeff smiled. He dealt the cards. Ante up, Jeff commanded as he threw 2 $5 bills on the table. Oh, you guys are playing with money? Real money? Caroline asked, incredulous. Ace looked up. Don't just sit there. Give her some money, Nash. He thumbed through a stack of bills and placed several in front of Caroline. Her eyes opened wide. You're kidding. That's $500. Try not to lose it all at once, he pleaded sarcastically. She made a face at him. She watched as each man placed $10 into the center of the table, and she did the same. Raising her cards carefully, she peeked at them and began arranging them. The others waited patiently on her until she appeared ready. I'll bet 20, Toby declared. He looked toward Caroline. She frowned. Very cutely, he thought. So I have to bet or I'm out, right? Right, Toby stated with a patient smile. Okay, I'm going to bet 22. Then she pushed the money out to the center. 20, Ace muttered. Billy Bob said nothing, only tossed $40 into the pot. I'll see your 20 and raise you 5, Jeff proclaimed. They went around the table again, and Caroline reluctantly placed another $5 in the pot. Toby nodded. Call. How many? Jeff asked. 2, Toby said as he shoved his cards at the dealer. They looked toward their newest poker buddy. So what I'm supposed to do now is see if I want to trade some of my cards for some different ones, right? That's right, Jeff said with a smile. Then I'll take 5, she said politely. Well, you can't have that many, Ace chuckled. She wrinkled her nose. Well, then how many can I have? Do you have an ace? I'm not supposed to tell you what I have, am I? Not usually, except in this instance, if you have an ace, you can get 4 cards. Otherwise, you can only get 3, Jeff informed her. She pressed her lips together. Well, that's a stupid rule. Okay, then, 3. I'll take 1, Ace said, grinning at the look of distress that seemed to cause Jeff. 2, the twins sang, each shoving 2 cards at Jeff. And I'll take 1, Jeff declared with a grin. I'm going to raise you 50, Toby stated calmly. Dollars? Caroline questioned. Yes, dollars, hon. It's okay. Don't worry about it. It's all coming back to me anyway. She shrugged. Okay, if you say so. Here's my 50. And I'll raise you 100. Whoa, wait a minute. Why did you say that? Toby sputtered. She smiled. I've always wanted to say something like that. It's like in the movies. Well, you didn't mean it, so take it back. I did mean it. It don't matter whether she meant it or not, Toby. She said it, and that's how it stands. Give me a break, guy. She doesn't know what she's doing. You just said it's okay. It's all coming back to you anyway, didn't you? She asked. Yes, he grumbled. I'll see that 150, Ace stated, trying to forward the game, and raise you another 100. We're in, Billy Bob chirped as they threw $500 in. Jeff tossed his money in, grinning at Toby. Toby threw $200 in the pot. They waited for Caroline. She sat there humming. Are you in? Toby finally asked her. Yes, of course I am. Well, then you have to put in the $100 that Ace raised. Oh, okay. She neatly placed $100 in the middle of the table and began straightening the mound of money. That's not necessary, sweetheart, Toby advised. You need to call. Call what? Well, that means you need to stop betting and everyone will show their cards, Jeff stated. Or did you want to bet some more? No, she doesn't, Toby insisted. Call, Caroline. Okay, she sang sweetly. I call. Jeff laid down his cards. 3 kings, he laughed. Billy Bob incredibly had 2 pair and 2 pair. Ace smiled as he laid his 4 of a kind, 10s, ace high, on the table. Too bad, Jeff, old buddy. Toby muttered a curse as he laid out his full house, 3 queens and 2 aces. What did you have, sweetheart? Toby leaned over to peek at Caroline's cards. He started laughing. Well, I don't think it's so funny, she pouted as she laid her cards on the table. I don't get any kings or queens or anything. Not even a 1. That's hardly fair. And the only thing I got was all these low cards, though isn't it sweet that they're all hearts? They looked her cards over and became silent. It was Ace's turn to curse. I don't believe it, Jeff cried. What? What's wrong? She asked. That's, Toby was trying to control his laughter. That, my love, is a straight flush. It is? Yes, it is. And just what does that mean? She asked. It means you won, darling, Jeff stated blandly. I did? The whole kit and caboodle, Toby announced. How much is that? I'd say roughly it's over 2,000, he said, still chuckling. Really? She could tell by the sour looks on the men's faces that Toby was telling the truth. She began handing the money back to them. Here, I don't want y'all's money. I was only playing for fun. No way, sweetheart, Ace said, patting her hand. We lost fair and square. The money is yours, all of it. Treat yourself to something nice. Are you sure? We're sure, they grumbled. She smiled up at Toby. He was looking at her in a way that made her want to tell the guys to go away now. But she persevered, and the group wagered through the night, losing hundreds more of their favorite dollars to the girl with amazing beginner's luck. Next scene. Caroline had never flown before and was sick with the anticipation. Toby watched her wring her hands and chew on her lower lip. Everything's going to be okay, he comforted. I'm sure that's what they tell everyone. That's probably what they told Richie Valens and Buddy Holly, too. And what about those poor people on September 11th and on those Malaysian fights? I think I'm going to be sick. Would you rather drive? Her eyes lit up. Yes. Can we? I can see if they'll let us off the plane. She frowned. I'm being a big baby, aren't I? I understand your fear, Caroline, and so do a lot of other people. Do you want me to speak to a flight attendant? She blew out a breath, resigning herself to her destiny. No, I can do this, she nodded. I can. Okay, I got this. Whatever will be, right? I'll try to be brave. He squeezed her hand. Everything's going to be okay. They taxied down the runway. Breathe slowly, he whispered. I am going to be sick, she moaned. The jet picked up speed, and she turned white as a ghost, and her nails dug into Toby's palm, and then they were airborne. Oh, Lord, have mercy, have mercy, have mercy, she chanted softly. Okay, darling, we're up and we're fine. In only a few hours we'll be in Nashville. She glanced over at him, moving only her eyes, afraid to move her head. She gave a slight nod. By the time they landed in Nashville and collected their luggage, Caroline was chattering away, releasing the nervous energy that had built up during the flight. Her constant questions and statements and comments were amusing Toby, since she was usually so quiet. He smiled and nodded as she pointed out an adorable baby, or made comments on some airport artwork, and laughed at how many guitars were included in people's luggages there in Nashville. He helped her read and understand monitor a monitor when she asked about it and joined her when she went over to shake hands with some departing servicemen. She had happily stopped to watch through the window as a jet took off when she heard the cry. "Oh my, y'all, look, it's Toby Nash." He pasted a smile on his face and held her hand tightly. "Darn. Hold on, here we go." "Oh, Toby, I have all your albums. I'm your biggest fan. Please let me take a selfie with you." The women didn't give him time to decline. She tried to step in between him and Caroline, only Toby held fast to Caroline's hand, forcing the girl to pose on the other side. Still, the effort was in vain. He had to let go of her hand to sign several autographs. He shook hands and received several hugs and kisses as Caroline was pushed farther and farther away. Finally, though, security showed up to help the star move through the crowd, and they tried to shoo Caroline away too, but Toby stopped, reached through the crowd, and grabbed her hand. "She's with me," he said loudly. Once they were safely in the dark interior of a limousine, Caroline scooted in close to Toby. "I'm sorry, Princess," he said. "That doesn't happen too often." "Oh, sure," she laughed. He was glad to see it hadn't affected her too much. "No, really, I'm small beans around here. I've lived here all my life, and people are used to seeing me, and I'm just Toby Smith. Only every once in a while does someone create a scene like that. Really, it's no big deal." "No big deal? Then why are we riding in a limo?" "Well, first, it's the easiest way home since I left my Explorer at the house. And second, a friend of mine runs this company, and I swore to him back when his father was driving us to the senior prom in one of the company's two vehicles that when I got rich and famous, I'd always use his father's limousine service, which is now his limousine service since his father retired." "Oh, well, that's a sweet story." Toby smiled. "You think everything is sweet." She yawned. "Not everything." They'd been up all night playing poker. Add that to the trauma of her first flight, and Toby wasn't surprised when Caroline's eyes drifted shut and her head drooped to rest on his chest. He watched her sleep, puzzling over how he would convince her to become his wife. Would being in the public eye be an obstacle? He had money, but it didn't keep him from living a relatively simple life on the farm. It was dealing with the public that he himself had struggled with at first. Would Caroline even want to put up with that situation? A larger obstacle would be the logistics. She had a dance career in New York. He traveled quite a bit and would be going on tour next summer. A long-distance marriage was out of the question. As much as he hated the big city, he'd have to join her in New York unless they could come up with some other solution. No matter what, though, he would not let anything get in the way of them being together. He woke her as they turned off the main road, and she sat up sleepily and peered through the window. It was spectacular. The fields she remembered seeing were still there, divided off in a patchwork of lush greens, deep browns, and gold. There were fruit trees in bloom lining the road and wildflowers everywhere. It was heaven, and Caroline's eyes filled with tears. The last time she'd been on this road, she'd felt lost. She'd been leaving a handsome boy on his front porch and aching in a heart that was broken. She turned to him now and realized he'd been watching her. "I love you, Princess," he uttered before he lowered his head and kissed her softly. They swung into the drive and stopped in front of what Caroline had always thought of as the glass house. Toby sprang from the car and helped her out, then helped unload their luggage, tipping the driver heavily. Caroline looked up at the house as she moved slowly up the porch steps and through the front door. "It's all still the same," she marveled. Not hardly," Toby laughed, "and Mom would die if she heard you say that. She's remodeled and refurbished and redone the place several times over in the last 15 years. "Well, to me it's the same," Caroline sighed, "only I don't remember it being 3 stories. 4, actually, if you count the lower level that you can't see from the house, from the front." "Is anyone else home?" "No. Molly and her husband live in Georgia while she's in medical school in Augusta. And Ben is in Texas doing postgraduate work at A&M. "How much longer will your mom and dad be out of the country?" "At least another 6 months. Why, are you afraid of being here all alone with me?" She shrugged. "Not afraid. It's just that, what will people say about you? I know you don't want any bad publicity." "You're the woman I love, Caroline, and I don't give a rat's behind what they say. Come on, let's get this stuff upstairs." They carried the luggage up to what would be her room. "I thought maybe you'd enjoy being in here again," he offered as they entered the room she'd stayed in 15 years earlier. Caroline smiled at the sweet thought. The room seemed smaller than she remembered. The bed was on the opposite wall, but still near the large window. Caroline gazed out over the front lawn and the beautiful landscape. She remembered Mrs. Stillwater telling her how beautiful it was here in the spring. She was right. Toby watched Caroline as she moved slowly around the room, their long ago conversation playing through his mind. There was a stack of fresh linens on the bed, sheets, pillowcases, a comforter, and towels. She laid her hand on them. We'll have to make up the bed ourselves. Apparently that's where Les draws the line. Who's Les? I guess you could call him the caretaker. Mostly he takes care of the horses and other animals and watches out for things while we're away. Sometimes he takes care of other things like filling the fridge full of food when he knows I'm coming home. He's a good man and an old family friend. You see, his wife died of cancer a few years ago and he was a mess, totally heartbroken. They didn't have any children, so he was all alone, and my parents visited him a few months after the funeral to see how he was doing, and my mom decided right there and then that he was coming to live with us. They built him his own little cottage here on the farm. It's a great place. He really helps us out, and he feels needed, so it's a good arrangement all around. That's a nice story. Your mom is so sweet. She is, and she's a God-fearing woman, and she truly tries to live as God would have us live, like treating others as we would like to be treated, that kind of stuff, he shrugged. Caroline's brow furrowed. And you don't believe in that kind of stuff? Sure, I guess I do. I'm just not that good at it. Not that good at what? He shrugged. At being godly, I guess. She grinned, like when you're gambling with the guys. He gave a sheepish grin. Yeah, I don't think Mom would look very kindly on that. What does God say about that kind of stuff? Well, one thing he says is the love of money is the root of all evil, and as my mother has pointed out to me many times, places built specifically for gambling are usually a den for sin, like drinking and carousing with women. I get it, but me and the guys, we just play friendly games of cards to break the boredom up when we're traveling. It's not like we're desperate to win because we need money. We're just killing time. I guess there are a lot more worthwhile things to do with your time, Caroline offered. Toby chuckled. Yep, I guess you're right. His brow furrowed. Do you believe in God, Caroline? I'm not sure. I don't remember ever going to church. Do you? Oh, yeah, we went to church every Sunday and Wednesdays, too. No, I meant, do you believe in God? Toby sat down on the bed. Sure, I do. He stopped and thought seriously a moment. Well, at least I think I do. I pray sometimes. I tell him thank you sometimes. His brow creased. Maybe I shouldn't have asked such a personal question. No, that's okay. Besides, I asked you first. I'm just thinking. I say I believe in God. I say I'm a Christian, but do I live like a man who believes? It looks like I have some soul searching to do. Caroline twisted her hands together, looking decidedly uncomfortable. He smiled at her. Come on, let's make the bed and raid the kitchen. I'm starved. New scene. While Toby worked away preparing his special triple-decker sandwiches, Caroline wandered around the main level of the house. The furniture was different, but the house had the same aura to it, one of peace, love, and happiness. It occurred to her that Toby's mom, being a, quote, godly woman, probably had a lot to do with how peaceful the house felt. She ran her hand over the piano, peered out the huge glass windows that gave the house the appearance of being made entirely of glass, and slowly she found her way to the door that led to the back hall where they had played so hard on that long ago New Year's Eve. She ran her hand over the door, memories flooding her brain, making her feel sad. You're looking for a dent? Toby asked quietly. She looked up and smiled. Well, there should be one as hard as you hit me. I can't tell you how bad I felt about that, but it did get you out of a lot of work. He took her hand. Lunch is ready. After they'd eaten, Toby took Caroline on a tour of the house. She peeked in the third-level bedrooms, which Toby informed her were his brother's, his sister's, and 2 guest bedrooms. And back on the second level were his parents' bedroom, the bedroom she would be using, another guest bedroom, and Toby's room. Glancing into Toby's bedroom, Caroline realized there was a balcony. She headed out onto it, Toby right beside her. The swing, it's still there. Yep, a body is never too old to play on a swing. But I don't remember the pool and those gardens and that terrace. The pool was put in the summer after you came. Each year, Mom adds something else. This is a beautiful home, Toby, she sighed. I could never imagine having a place like this. He turned her toward him. It was tempting to offer it right this moment, but he knew it wasn't the right time. Offering marriage so that she could have a nice home wasn't exactly romantic and would be insulting to Caroline. If she had anything, it was her pride. He tugged on her arm. Let's play. They went downstairs, through the back hall, into the game room, and through the glass doors to the backyard. He lifted her into the tire swing, grabbed the swing, and backed up several steps, and with a running start he pushed her hard, and Caroline flew up into the air and out over the hill, her breath leaving her in a shriek of laughter. Toby pushed again, and she laughed harder, throwing her head back, her hair flying in the wind. After several trips, Toby grabbed the swing, bringing her to an abrupt halt. He lifted her, swinging off, for a giant kiss. Lord have mercy, Caroline, you make me want to eat you alive. She laughed. I suppose that should frighten me, but it only sounds intriguing. They left the swing to roam the gardens. Walking arm in arm, they chatted, learning new things about each other. There were several subjects Toby wanted to approach. The Stillwaters, and why she broke off her relationship with them was one he thought might be important. Another was why she didn't want any kids. He also knew he should tell her about Tracy eventually, and of course the main subject was, would she consider becoming his wife? They sat by the pool and talked until evening, but he found no opening to bring up any of the subjects on his mind. They made their way back inside and cuddled up on the sofa and talked some more. There was so much they'd missed of each other's lives. Several times during all that talking, Toby started to ask Caroline about the Stillwaters, or tell her about Tracy and how he'd come to be involved with her. Tracy had been a giant mistake on his part, and now, with Caroline by his side, he couldn't even remember what he'd been thinking when he'd finally agreed to marry her. He'd had to break it off with her if he were to be honest with her. And he felt bad about it, and bad for Tracy, though she didn't deserve to find someone who truly loved her. Didn't she deserve to find someone who truly loved her? Each time he'd started to bring up a subject, Caroline would say something terribly interesting that would divert his attention. He vowed to himself he would clear the air over dinner, yet as they worked in the kitchen side by side, preparing their meal, he couldn't bring himself to disturb the peaceful evening. They dined by candlelight, on steaks and salad, and Toby had wine, which Caroline refused. You had nothing to drink at the restaurant the other night, and nothing during our poker game. You don't drink at all? My mother was an alcoholic, Toby. You know that. I live in fear of being like her. Oh, you're much too strong for that, my love. She frowned. You don't know that. You don't know anything about it. Okay, hold on now. I may not know what it feels like to have an alcoholic parent, but I do know you, and I know you're much stronger than you give yourself credit. No. Yeah, but I won't argue with you now. I have no desire to get you all riled up. He looked into her troubled face, so many scars. He needed to smooth them away, and this little scene helped him to understand what was going through her head. She was afraid of being like her mother. Come on now, let's not ruin a wonderful evening. I'm sorry if I pressed too much. She looked down. I'm sorry I'm so touchy. He smiled and kissed her hand. They finished their meal and did up the dishes and moved into the living room, and habit had Toby sitting down at the piano. He played for Caroline. She closed her eyes and let the sweet sounds of the piano, along with Toby's mellow voice, take her away. It did more than soothe her, though. It was an amazing aphrodisiac. No wonder all his fans couldn't keep their hands off him. She rose and moved to stand behind him, running her hands over his shoulders and bending to kiss his cheek. You singing like that makes me feel all fuzzy inside, she whispered in his ear. You rubbing my shoulders and whispering in my ear makes me feel the same way. How? She squeezed his shoulders. I mean, all I'm doing is this. He stopped playing and placed his hands on top of hers, stilling them. That's all it seems to take. Just your touch. You mean like this? She squeezed once more. Ah, sweet Caroline. He turned and quickly pulled her onto his lap, and their mouths came together. The kiss lingered. Finally, he glanced up. He could see their reflection in the glass of the giant windows. It was such a lovely picture. Him at the piano, her in his lap, cuddled up against his chest. It would make a great album cover, he thought. And that is the end of chapter 6.